And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's live. Today, we are going to be doing another DevOps project in our DevOps X AWS series. I'm very, very excited to be doing this with you guys. There are so many learnings to be had in the next hour. So I wonder where you are in this world. Put it in the chat. And let's get started. So what I'll do first is I'm going to share my screen so you can see my working area, and you're going to see that I already have my AWS console open on the left-hand side of my screen. And then instead of the step-by-step project, I actually have our community open in the right-hand side of the screen. So if you don't have access to the Nextdoor community yet, this is where you're going to get access to the step-by-step project guide that I'm about to walk through in today's demo. If you are already in the Nextdoor community, hello, very exciting. And here is how you can get access to the project that we're about to do. So once you're in the community, click into that All AWS channel on the left-hand side. Okay, and once you're in, you're gonna see a tile right over here. And it has what we need. It says secure project dependencies with AWS CodeArtifact. That is exactly this project today. So let's click into it. And there's that handy link at the start that says start your project here. That's where you're going to click as well. Boom, boom, done. And we're here. Hi, Ruben. Thanks so much for being here today. Did you get to do our previous project, or are you trucking along with the QuickSight project still? Oh my gosh, very exciting that you're here. All right, so this is the project step-by-step guides landing page, and I'm going to walk through this a bit quickly because I can't wait to dive into the project steps with you very, very soon. And like every project in the Nextdoor community, there are always two options for you to do it. The first option says, tell me what to do and I'll figure out some parts on my own. This is a really great option if you are someone that likes to click around, that likes to explore on your own, that likes to do a bit of problem solving, you know? And option 2 says, give me the step-by-step guide. Now, this is really great if you're new to AWS and you're not quite sure where to start. You know, let's go through this project step-by-step together. We're going to tell you exactly where to click. We're going to tell you exactly what to type. We're going to tell you exactly which tab to switch to. And this is a great place to start if you're just wanting to do something hands-on in AWS, but you're really just wanting that guidance so you can get to the finish line as well. So, of course, in this project, we are doing part 3 of our DevOps X AWS series, which means that it will be a little bit fast if you haven't done the first 2 parts of the series yet. That's why I do highly recommend that you check out parts 1 and 2 of the series first. The links to those videos are also in the description box below. And also a little bit of experience with security, it would also be great. You know, if you've done our AWS IAM project on security, then you would be a lot more familiar with some of the setup steps we're about to do today. If you haven't done those, no worries. We're still going to be doing all of the steps that you need to do this from start to finish without needing any special AWS account setup. So you can absolutely still follow this through as well. Cool. Now, what we're going to be doing today is you're going to learn how to use a service called AWS CodeArtifact. Now, think of AWS CodeArtifact like this sort of like secure closet, this like treasure chest where you keep all the building blocks that your web app will need to work. And these building blocks are called packages. So just like you might need to store extra like batteries or light bulbs at home if you're ready if something goes out, like if the electricity goes out or if one of your light bulbs just like pops at home. CodeArtifact honestly works quite similarly. It helps you keep these copies, these backup copies of these packages safe. This way, even if something goes wrong with the public repositories where these packages are stored in the internet, you still have everything you need to keep like working on your app. For context, in parts 1 and 2 of this project, you would have learned how to create that web app from scratch, and you would have learned how to create a Git repository to store all of your project's code. So now that you have your project's code all together in one place, there are a few things called dependencies that you're going to learn about and packages that you will need to store with CodeArtifact. So let's jump into it. Like every project demo, we're going to be using option 2 today. Cool. All right, so I'm in the page that is showing option 2 right now. So this is our high touch guidance. We're going to go through every single step, every single click together. And first of all, please delete all your resources by the end of the day, even if you don't finish the entire project. And this is really important to make sure that this project is free for you. I feel like AWS probably earns the most money from people accidentally leaving things in their account. Okay, I've been a victim of this before, and I'm going to tell you now, please make sure you delete all of your resources by the end of the day. Sometimes a sneaky thing is you might tell yourself like, oh yeah, like I'll finish this tomorrow and then I'll remember to delete things. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, sometimes you might not actually end up finishing this project. So protect yourself and make sure that you delete all of these resources. And we'll also be going through how to delete all those resources at the end of this demo. All right, and step 0 is to get ready to document. Make a copy of the documentation template that's linked here. So all you have to do is click on that link in your project guide and you'll get taken straight through to this template. And to make this template completely your own, you're going to make a copy of it. Okay, so we're going to click on File in that handy top left-hand section. And then we're going to click on Make a Copy. So let's make that copy right now. And now this copy is your documentation. You might be wondering, why do we write documentation for these projects? You might have just noticed that I mentioned that you have to delete everything at the end of your project. So how do you keep a record of all of your learnings? How do you show people like, this is what I've done if you're going to be deleting everything? This is where documentation steps in. It is the place where you will be capturing all of your learnings. It is the place where you're going to show evidence of what you've learned, show evidence of what you've created. And it is also a very shareable piece of evidence as well. The way that you can put this in a LinkedIn post, the way that you can share this in an email. Documentation templates are kind of like little diaries for every single project that you do. Absolutely worth the time to be writing your project documentation as you do the project, because I think all of those juicy learnings, like it is best documented in the moment. So what we're going to do now is, now that we've created our own copy of our template today, let's delete that first slide that tells you to make a copy. Okay, we've done that already. And if you like a little Canva warm-up or a little warm-up to edit this documentation template, let's just click on your full name here and let's replace that with your actual full name. So, well, I'll write Natasha Ong. That's my full name, but write your own full name. Cool. That is all we need to do to warm up to our documentation template, because what we're going to do now is we're going to jump right into the project steps one more time so we can get started. Okay, step 1, set up your web app and the Git repository. So these are steps that we went through in projects 1 and 2 of this DevOps x AWS series. And what this means is, if you find that this setup is going a bit too quickly, you're wanting things to slow down a little bit so you can hear the in-depth explanations, please visit the video demos for those projects respectively. Again, the link to those are in the description box. And how we're going to start is we're going to start from the very top. We're going to log in to our AWS account as an IAM admin user. And if you don't have that IAM user set up, or you haven't done that at all before, let's do it now together as well. So how we'll do that is we'll head to the AWS account as your root user. So this is the account that you've always had ever since you first created your AWS account. And we'll open the IAM console to start creating an IAM user. All right. As a reminder, why we're using an IAM user today, it's because of 2 reasons. Okay, the first reason is that AWS will actually be protecting your root user from a few of the services we'll be using throughout this DevOps series, which means if you continue using your root user to complete this entire project, you're going to be stuck at a certain point that says you can't advance because you don't have the permissions to do it, which is quite ironic because you're using the root user. But actually for security purposes and to make sure you're not vulnerable to any sort of attacks, there are going to be a few actions your root user can't actually perform that your IAM user can perform. And that's why we'll be creating that IAM user. Second reason is it is always, always, always recommended by AWS that you use your IAM user for your day-to-day activities, and to use that root user when you really need to use a root user. And that scenario would be when you really need to use it for financial and like billing situations. So what this means is ideally you'll be using your IAM user for all the projects that you do. and only going to your root user when you really need it. All right, without further ado, let's start creating that IAM user now. And there's already a template for the username that you need to use. I am net, I am admin. Make sure you give yourself that access to the AWS Management Console so you can actually have a very visual interface for doing your project today. Otherwise, from personal experience, it gets a little hard without the Management Console if you're a complete beginner as well. And I'm very comfortable with all of these default settings. They're going to create a password for you. And I don't really need to create a new password for myself at next sign-in. So I'll be deselecting that. But if that's your preference, keep it checked. That's all cool. And I'm going to select next. So when we attach permissions to our IAM user, we're basically creating these rules that says you have access to this, 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 and this. And since what we're creating is an IAM admin user, we're going to give it admin access. So make sure you click that option that says attach policies directly. And when you scroll down under permission policies, this is where you're going to set up the rules that your IAM user will get. Luckily for us, administrator A is first in the alphabet, which means you don't even need to search for it. It's already right here. It's in the second line, administrator access, and you can just click on that checkbox next to it. And administrator access is pretty much the highest, like the greatest level of access you can give to an IAM user. It will literally have access to like all the things that you would want to do in an AWS account, just except for the billing and finances kind of stuff that only the root user would have access to by default. Okay, let's create that user now. And pause here. Okay, the moment your IAM user is created, let's just pause here. Don't rush into it. I know orange buttons are like very enticing to click on, but we're gonna actually pause here and make sure we download the CSV file. Okay, we're gonna download the CSV file that gives us a copy of our IAM user's username and password, basically everything it needs to log in as an IAM user. And downloading it now is very, very important because once you click out of the screen, this option to download the CSV file for the current password is no longer available. And that is, again, for security reasons. Okay, but you would have noticed that what we've done now is we have already created the IAM user. And what we can do is first log out of the root user that we've been in, sign out, and now we will kick off the project as the IAM user now. So we're going to sign into the console one more time, but this time it's going to look slightly different because this time we're using the IAM user. To find your username and password, all you have to do is use the CSV file. So hunt for that CSV file in your downloads folder, and you're going to see it pop up with a spreadsheet that just has 3 columns. It's super, super simple. Nothing too intimidating. We're going to let my spreadsheet software, my Excel, warm up. Okay, there we go. It's ready now. And you'll see here, super handy, it already has my username and password laid out for me. So just copy that username over and just paste that into the username field. Same thing with the password. And sign in. Ta-da! Rio in the comments says, great project. Thank you so much. Have you tried this project already? How did you find it? I'm very, very curious now. Awesome. And then, ta-da! We're now back into our AWS account, but now we are logged in as the IAM user. So a great success, and you just have to double check whether you are the IAM user by just checking if it is your IAM user's username on the top right-hand corner. Abbas and Udawak, welcome. Hi back. This is very cool. How are you going with the project? Cool. The next step is we're going to create our Cloud9 environment, and we're going to jump straight into it. I'm going to create that environment and name it Network IDE. Make sure that you're using a new EC2 instance. Make sure you're using t2.micro as the instance type because that is the free tier eligible type. If you're clicking into any of these other ones, you're probably going to get charged. So make sure you're clicking on t2.micro. And for the platform, okay, this one is easy to slip up on, okay, because the first 70% of the letters look exactly the same. But instead of Amazon Linux 2023, select Amazon Linux 2 instead. Okay, and this selection is pretty important because later on when you're going to be running a few commands, there's going to be a few commands that Amazon Linux 2023 will probably say this command I don't really get it. But Amazon Linux 2 will be able to successfully run all of the commands you do. And yeah, I think that is all the setup we need to create our Cloud9 environment. Again, if you're wanting that slower explanation on, what is Cloud9? What are we creating? Please check out that link to the very first project in this DevOps series. Cool. It's all created now, so we're ready to open our environment. Are you ready? Okay. Now, the first time you open your environment, it's going to take about 15 to 20 seconds for it to actually be ready for you to enter a few commands to it. But that's okay. We're just going to wait together while we have a think about what's going to happen next. So what's going to happen next is we've created our environment, and this environment is where we're going to be writing our code, managing our code, creating that project. And the first thing we're going to do to make this happen is install two very handy tools that will help us with creating our Java web app. These two tools are called Maven and Java. And how we'll do this is first we're going to install Maven. All right. Our IDE is already ready for us, so let's install Maven right away. The code or the commands to install Maven is already right here. All you have to do is highlight it from the step-by-step guide and paste that into the terminal. Cool. Don't forget to press enter, by the way, after you paste that in. And once you enter it, I'm going to expand my terminal so you can see this all unfold. But our terminal is now filled up with lots of little messages just to tell us like its process, like its progress with installing Maven. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a bit more as well so you can see this in detail with me. Okay, yeah, do you see like all of these messages are coming through, and it's just the terminal telling us like, okay, this is what I'm installing now. This is where I'm at with like installing Maven into your EC2 instance. And it's looking great. Cool. So once that's done, we're going to go straight into installing that next tool, which is Java. So all you have to do again is highlight the necessary commands. Okay, these 4 lines over here, and paste that into your terminal right away. Okay, again, let's press enter. Don't forget to press enter at the very end. And ta-da! Again, your terminal is getting filled up with all these messages reassuring you that it is installing Java. And it's also a great place to diagnose any errors. If, let's say, your terminal actually runs into an error and says, oh, sorry, like I can't install this. Often the terminal will give you a few messages to give you a few hints on why that is, and whether there's anything you can do to solve it. Okay, so to verify that we have just installed Java and Maven correctly, we'll run 2 more commands. One is called Java version, so we'll put that through. And the next is MVN, which stands for Maven, -v, which stands for version. Okay, very, very cool. All right, so what we see here is a success with installing Java, so that's awesome. And let's run our Maven command. Okay, very cool. So you might have noticed that just now, the first time I ran my Maven command, it actually says MVN command not found. If you see that happen, first things first, don't panic. This happens all the time. What you can do first to diagnose this is just hand type that command instead of copying and pasting it from the step-by-step guide. So what I just did just now was I hand typed it into the terminal, ran it, and now it works. So it's telling me what I need to see. Apache Maven 3.5.2, that's the version we need. And let's move on to the next step, which is all about creating the web application using the tools we just created. We've installed Maven, we've installed Java. Now we're going to put them into work. Okay, the next terminal we're going to put, the next command we're going to put through is all about saying, hey, Maven, can you use this template you already have to create a Java web app, and actually just create that web app for me right now. And it's such a great way to set yourself up, to create a web app, because that template's already there. It saves you a lot of time, saves you a lot of work, and you can get straight into creating the meaty, juicy parts of your web app and less time on setting up the infrastructure for it if that template's already there. So once you run this command, you're going to see that something special pops up in the left-hand side of your screen. So let me expand my left-hand side of my screen so you can see it. But do you see that there's a folder now that says Nextwork-web-project? So that is the Java web app right here in its baby stages. And you can even expand it, to see all of the files that Maven has just created for us. So thank you so much, Maven, for your service. And here we have our Java web app. You can even double click on index.jsp, and this is where we can start customizing our web app. So index.jsp is where we can start writing what our web app is actually about, what the users are going to see when they visit our web app. And I am going to pull down my terminal now so you can see more of my screen. But perfect. Let us edit index.jsp. Oops. I think my terminal is a little bit too tall. You actually need to even drag it down from the very top now. Oof. That was interesting. Double click on index.jsp so you can start editing it right away. Okay, let's have a look now. So we already have some sample code ready for you in the step-by-step project guide, but if you're very familiar with HTML and you want to create your own web app, why not? Have that creative freedom. In the meantime, I'm going to use that template to just define something very, very simple and replace your name with your name. So I'm going to replace your name with my name here so that it says hello, Natasha. And once that's done, don't forget to save your changes. So how you do that is you can just press Command S if you're using a Mac or Control S if you're using a Windows on your keyboard. The other way, if you prefer, is to use File from that top panel and click on Save here, and it does the exact same thing. But yeah, very exciting. Next up, we're going to create that repository in AWS CodeCommit. So we're now entering into the Project 2 territory now in this DevOps series. So now if you're thinking, okay, what we're doing is a little bit too fast for me, or, oh, I would like to hear a more in-depth explanation of what's going on, I'd highly recommend checking out the video for Part 2 or Project 2 of this series. It is also in the link in the description. Great. Now, to kick off our repository in AWS CodeCommit, what we're going to do is we are going to search for that console, the CodeCommit console in our AWS account. So I'm going to switch tabs back into where I can find my AWS Management Console. So we're now out of the Cloud9 land and back into our AWS Management Console land, and use that handy search bar at the top always to find what service you're looking for. I'm looking for AWS CodeCommit, so I'm going to type that in. I'm going to click on CodeCommit right here. And we're now ready to create our repository. So how we do this is we click on that orange button that says Create Repository, and we can name it right away. In this case, I'm going to name it Nextwork Web Project. I'm going to do a fancy little -1 because I already have this repository in my account, and I'm pretty sure 2 repositories can't have the same name. Otherwise, CodeCommit might get a bit confused. So you can name yours Nextwork-web-project and give it a little description as well. Descriptions are optional, as you might see here, but they're absolutely best practice as well, just to give anyone that's visiting your repository a bit of context into, what's in this repository. In our case, we're creating a web application for the Nextwork homepage, so that's what we're writing in the description. Okay, let's click Create and dive back into our Cloud9 environment. So we have our Git repository all set up now with CodeCommit. And now in Cloud9, we're going to set up the Git identity. And how you do that is, again, in the terminal, we're going to type in our handy little commands. The first one is git config global username, which is basically telling Git, hey, I'm here. My name is Natasha. My email is, natasha@nextwork.org. And now when I save any changes or make any changes, you can track those changes back to me, back to my identity. It's almost like creating a little user profile, so that Git will always identify you once you make those changes to your repositories. And in my case, I'm going to just type in my name now, Natasha. Hi, Gabrielle. That is such a sweet comment, by the way. That is the best. Stop it. That's too flattering now. But I really appreciate it. And thanks so much for being here again. And as I mentioned here, I'm not sure if you can see this very clearly. So let me just zoom in a little bit for you. Git config global. Now I'm going to be setting up my email in here. Git config global user.email is natasha@nextwork.org. Boom, done. So that is our Git identity all set up. As a bit of reassurance, if you're wondering, I already have a GitHub account, I have a GitLab account, I have a GitX account. This won't create a new account for you. This is a different kind of system that's happening within your terminal right now. Okay, so now that we're here, we're just going to make sure that we can create a local repository. So I'm going to paste in the commands that are already given to me, and that creates my local repository, which is basically my local workspace that's going to track all of the changes I make to this web application within my local computer. In this case, that local computer is the EC2 instance that's hosting your Cloud9 IDE. And this local repository is different from the CodeCommit Git repository we've hosted in the cloud. So now it's time to connect them. How do I make sure that the changes I make in my local computer can now get pushed through to what's happening to that CodeCommit repository that's in the cloud? So to connect them, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to that CodeCommit console and clone the URL, and then create a new command in my Cloud9 terminal. Now I'm back in my local workspace, and say, hey, local workspace, I'm going to tell you now that you have kind of like a main workspace, almost like a main folder for this project. And that folder is, the CodeCommit repository. And you know how I just copied in that HTTPS, that URL to the CodeCommit repository, just paste that in here. And we're all sorted, just like that. So now we can commit and push our code with these commands. And these are the 3 golden commands that will help you with doing that. So the first command is called git add, the second one is called git commit, and the third one is called git push. So whenever you want to save your changes and make sure those changes get represented in your CodeCommit repository that's in the cloud, all you have to do is run through these 3 commands. And what I did just now was I just copied what was in the step-by-step project guide. I pasted that in my terminal, and hooray, let's go check our CodeCommit repository and see if all my latest changes are there. So I'm going to refresh what's here, and boom, here we go. You might recall src pom.xml. Oh, sorry, I think I just clicked out a bit too far there. But in my CodeCommit repository, you can now see the folders and files that were created in my local repository over here. So literally src pom.xml, you can see that here now. And you can even click into this folder and see all of the nested folders and all the nested files that are inside. Looking very, very good. That is chef's kiss perfect. And that means we can move on to the next step. We have now finished all of the setup for our project that we're doing today about AWS CodeArtifact. So now we're going to start slowing down a little bit. I'm going to be doing a bit more in-depth explanations because we're now entering kind of like new content or like new learnings land. So thank you so much for spending that first 28 minutes with me setting up for this project, but we're ready now. Let's do it. So first thing we're going to learn is, now that we have a working CodeCommit repository that's going to store and version control our code, the next thing we're doing is to use AWS CodeArtifact to secure our project's dependencies. You might be looking at these 2 sentences and thinking, Natasha, these 2 sentences, they're not connected. They are not related whatsoever. What do you mean? Like, why are we going from version controlling our code to securing project dependencies? What are these dependencies anyway? So let's start these explanations from the top. What are project dependencies? Just now in Cloud9, we've been creating a web app. And just now in CodeCommit, we've been storing our web app's code into this very safe repository in the cloud. Now we're going to talk about dependencies. And if your application depends on a package to function correctly, which means like your app won't work as it should, or it won't run at all if the package becomes unavailable, then that package is considered a dependency for your application. No matter what kind of web app you're building, any web app will have its dependencies. Okay, dependencies are absolutely like very, very common in any kind of web app you create. So what that means is this is a very, very common use case, having dependencies that you will need to now store backups of. For example, React.js is a very, very popular package. And package means a bundled set of code and files. And React.js is a very, very popular package that developers will use to create these interactive components in their websites. For example, if you have a website that can change without you having to reload your page. For example, if you have a website that's all about like, here's your online to-do list, and you can like write this to-do list without needing to refresh your page each time. There's often React.js kind of like playing here, helping developers create these interactive websites. So that's an example of a dependency, because now imagine if React.js doesn't exist anymore. Maybe that means that the developers that created their web apps with React.js, those web apps aren't going to function as they should. Now maybe their users will need to reload their page to see their page update. And that is considered a dependency because the web app isn't functioning as it should. So again, you might be thinking, wait a second, what are packages? Can you please backtrack a little bit? If you're new to this, that's completely okay. One of the first things you've done in this project is install Apache Maven. You might remember that was one of the very first commands that we ran when we hopped into our Cloud9 environment for the very first time. And part of that building, part of Apache Maven's job is to help with building your application later on. Building means being able to bundle up or pull in all of the software and the files that you add to your project to add these new functionalities. And these packages that Apache Maven is going to pull in to help you add those functionalities to your web app, these packages can come from public repositories. And these public repositories means other developers have created them. They've put them on the internet for you to use, often for free. And now people are creating some really great web apps using these tools. But again, because these are tools that maybe your web app now relies on, these packages are also now considered dependencies. And dependencies can become a bit of a risk. We'll find out why in a second. Cool. So first, we're going to search for CodeArtifact in our console. So here in the console, use that search bar to search for CodeArtifact. So you can visit your CodeArtifact console in this way. Or another way is you can use the sidebar here. So you see how we're in CodeCommit, but that sidebar is actually shared across all of the services that make up the CI/CD pipeline, in which is like the entire DevOps series that we're doing, by the way. So we have CodeCommit at the very top, then we have CodeArtifact, Code Build, Code Deploy, Code Pipeline. In this entire series of DevOps projects, we're going to be touching on all of these. But for now, we've already ticked off CodeCommit. When we created that Git repository. Next up, we're now going to jump into CodeArtifact. So let's jump into CodeArtifact now to see what it looks like. Okay, here we are. What is CodeArtifact, you might wonder? That might be your next question. And remember what I said just now about having these dependencies are a bit of a risk? So these resources that live in the public internet, there's no real guarantee that it's going to be available to you forever. There's going to be a chance that those public resources suddenly become unavailable, or maybe they even become removed. Like, what if the person that created this package is like, yeah, nah, like I'm gonna remove this for some reason, for some random reason. In the real world, an outage of a dependency can completely break that CI/CD pipeline we're learning about. For example, let's say a dependency is gone now, Maven will fail to build your web app, so any testing and deploying of those latest changes are also forced to stop. So this is where CodeArtifact will come in. Think of CodeArtifact as this private storage locker for you to keep a backup copy of all of those dependencies for your web app. Even if a dependency goes down in a public repository that it comes from, from the place that Maven would pull from in the public space, you have that backup copy in your private storage locker in CodeArtifact. And that means you can continue building your web app without any hiccups. Isn't that just so good? I have had so much appreciation for CodeArtifact ever since I learned about what it does. Like, it's truly there to give you this very secure copy of some important, very, very important files that you'll need to make sure that your web app can still be built very successfully. So I always think about CodeArtifact as a way to manage risk, in your project. All right. You can imagine how CodeArtifact adds a layer of reliability and security. It protects your development process from these external disruptions, these external disruptions being dependencies suddenly becoming unavailable. And that is why it's super relevant to a DevOps role. All right, so what this was talking about is like, hey, did you know all of these CI/CD services are all connected in the same navigation bar? We just talked about that, so we can just scroll down. And let's start by creating a domain. And you can find domains in the left-hand menu of your navigation bar. So let's click on domains and let's create one. Cool. So my account already has a domain, which is my bad. But what you're going to see is exactly the same page as this, except without this yellow banner. And all you have to do to create a domain is just type in a name. That's it. That's truly it. For me, my domain name is Nextwork. And what I'll do next is just create domain, and that's it. And then you would have a domain created. Think of domains as these big folders which you can use to organize and keep smaller folders of your project materials. Each of these smaller folders will be called a repository, and the collection of all of those repositories is called a domain at the very top. And you also notice that your domain gets a URL, and this URL is basically the very key entry point that applications will use to fetch and store the dependencies that live inside the repositories in your domain. So think of the domain as like this big folder or like this big gate that any application that wants to get access to the repositories under will have to go through your big gate. And then once they go through the big gate, all of the repositories that are storing your project dependencies are now accessible, to the applications that get through. So yeah, typically a developer would just create one domain to manage all of their artifacts, just one big folder to manage all of their artifacts in one folder, in one place. But larger companies might end up using multiple domains if they have vastly different projects, or they just need to isolate resources for security needs. But yeah, like I mentioned, all you have to do is type in Nextwork here, and you can just click you just create your domain right away. Very, very handy. So right behind that, once we've created our domain, you can click on repositories. And let's create a repository now. How you can do that is you can click create repository, and you're going to see I already have 2 repositories in here from testing this project right before this. So you might have 0 things in your repository page. That is completely what we want as well. What's important is we're just going to create a new one. So let's create a repository and let's name it Nextwork Packages. Oh, since you know what, I'm going to delete the repositories that are on my screen so that we can all start from the top together. I think that would be best. So let me quickly delete my repositories so we can start from the same place. And let me delete this one too. Boom, boom, done. Okay, now this is probably going to be the screen that you look at most. And let's just create the repository right away. click on create repository. Let's click on repository name, the field here, to give it a name. We're going to call it Network Packages. And there's even a description field, packages for the Network web app. By the way, if you're still watching this, how about let's put in the chat how you would explain packages or dependencies to someone else. I feel like this has been one of the hardest things for me to explain. So I'd love to see how you guys put a spin on it or give your own take. How would you explain packages? How would you explain dependencies? I'd love to see it in the chat. Okay, so we have created a repository now called Network Packages, and we're going to select something called the public upstream repository. Okay, and we're going to, oh, that was a misclick. We're going to use Maven Central Store. Okay, and then we're going to click next. Okay, let's stop here for a quick second and just talk about what was that public upstream repository we selected, because I've never seen this term before, before using CodeArtifact. So let's learn about this because it's quite important. Your public upstream repository is not the same as this repository that you're creating now, okay? These are two different repositories, but they're both getting created. So why is that? So let's take a look at the short description under Maven Central Store. It says it provides Maven artifacts from the Maven Central repository. So this is another repository. This is another repository. And then this is another repository. So we have 3 repositories now. How are they connected? Why do they exist? Okay, so starting from what we're creating, Network Packages, this is our local repository. Think of this as your local toolbox that you keep all of the software packages you've already installed in your computer. In this case, this computer is the EC2 instance that's running in our cloud, that's running our Cloud9 environment. So that is the Amazon Linux 2, that EC2 instance that we set up at the very start. So when Maven builds your project, when Maven decides to, compile all of the code that you've created, it first checks your local repository to see if the required packages that it needs to build your project, if it's already in your local toolbox. But sometimes it doesn't. If the needed packages are not in your local repository, Maven then checks your upstream repository. So that is the public upstream repository we've just selected. So this is kind of like the local hardware store that you would visit if you don't have what you need in your toolbox at home. It is set up quite close at home. It doesn't have everything, but it does store a lot of tools that developers would often use. So think of it as like that handy option around the corner that you can go to instead of having to drive really, really far to that big Costco, to that big warehouse every time. So you will go to this local store because it's faster and more convenient. Same in this scenario. If Maven can't find what it's looking for in your local toolbox, it's going to go straight to the public upstream repository next to find the packages that it needs to build your web app. But what if our public upstream repository doesn't have it? What if your local hardware tools store says, "Oh, sorry, we don't have that in stock"? When that happens, we go another level up, and we now visit the Maven Central repository. So this is like the huge warehouse that stores a vast amount of tools and supplies. It's open to everyone in the world, and it has a very, very comprehensive collection. But that's the reason why it has really, really high traffic, and it's not very practical to go there for every single thing. It is pretty far away compared to that local store around the corner. So Maven would only visit the Maven Central repository if the required package is not even in that local hardware store. It's not even in Maven Central Store, if it really, really needs to go another level up. So think of it as first port of call is your local repository. So that is the number one place Maven's going to go to. Okay, can't find it. Doesn't have the package I'm looking for. Fine. Next stop, Maven Central Store. But if even Maven Central Store doesn't have what it needs, fine. Let's go to the Maven Central repository. And across these 3 repositories, Maven should absolutely be able to find all of the packages that it needs to build your project. Cool. Next. All right, so we're going to click next. I just realized this step is not in the step-by-step guide, which is my slip. But in this case, it is just asking, select the AWS account that owns your CodeArtifact domain. Just select domains and repositories must exist within the same AWS region, currently set to Asia Pacific, Sydney. Okay, great. In my scenario, because I created my domain in this account, this AWS account, owns the domain. And select next. Cool. Okay, I think it is time for us to even check out this cool little flow diagram here that summarizes what we've just learned. Cool. Okay, what does this diagram say? It's like a package flow. Review how packages flow from external connections through Network to Network packages. Nice. I love it. I love seeing this so much. Remember how we just said that there are these 3 repositories that Maven will kind of go through step by step to eventually find what it needs? This is basically that step-by-step kind of flow in a diagram. Our local repository, step 1 is Network packages. The upstream repository, step 2, is Maven Central Store. And then the big one, the Maven Central repository, which is called Maven Central here, is step 3. It's the public one. So you will see how packages kind of flow first from the public space into that local hardware store, and then from your local hardware store into your personal toolbox. Okay, so I think this is where we can review and create the repository now. So let's click on click repository. I have accidentally clicked on create repository a bit too soon because we were supposed to take a screenshot. It says take a screenshot of the package flow panel showing the connections from public Maven Central to Network packages. Oh no. Oh no, I was supposed to take a screenshot of that, wasn't I? I took the liberty of explaining that entire flow, knowing I needed to screenshot it later, and I still forgot to screenshot it. Okay, team, when this happens, you have 2 options. Okay, the first option is almost like the honorable way to do it, which is like to click repositories, create a new one. You can create a random new one that you don't need to save. You're just creating it for the sake of getting it to that page again. I'm just going to call it Network packages 2. Okay, quickly zoom to the public upstream repository and make sure you still select this one. And then again, this account owns the domain. Next, take a screenshot of the package flow, and then we're going to abandon this one. Okay, package flow. Yeah, Gabrielle in the chat says, you can create a new one to take the screenshot. That's what I'm doing now. Shh. Okay, so I've taken my screenshot now. I don't actually need this repository. I already have what I need. So I'm going to go back to here, which is the page that I left off at. But since I've taken my screenshot, I guess we can fill in our documentation. So we have our copy of our documentation here, and the first thing is called create a repository. Okay, we're going to paste our screenshot here. Boom. Bust it into our frame so that it fits, our screenshot fits nicely into the frame that's already provided in the template, and fill in some prompts. There are already a few prompts in this template that kind of encourages you to explain these things to show your learnings. So let's do it. AWS CodeArtifact is a service that sits in the CI/CD pipeline. I am using it today to store backup copies of packages and, importantly, dependencies relevant to my Java web app. Oh, I accidentally answered the next prompt, but I think we can actually go a bit more specific here. The reason why I'm using CodeArtifact for my web app is for security. Risk management, and continuity. Now, even if the public packages or dependencies of my project is of my project grammatically correct? I'm wondering this out loud right now. Now, even if the public packages or dependencies of my project, I won't leave it for now, but if it's not grammatically correct, let me know in the chat. I'm very curious now. Even if the public packages or dependencies of my project are no longer available, there is a copy in my AWS CodeArtifact repositories to make sure I can keep developing my web app. Thank you to the person that's sending heart reactions in the chat. I appreciate it. Okay. Well, clearly I'm a bit of a talkative person because I've already maxed out my documentation templates text area. So what I'll do is I'm going to duplicate this page so that I can talk about this over 2 pages instead of 1. Okay. All right. So in my second page, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep talking. Okay. In my second page, I'm going to keep talking by continuing where I left off of. Okay. Instead of a single repository, there are actually 3 connected repositories that Maven uses to fetch packages. Lawrence in the chat says, let's go, Nat. Thank you so much. Let's go, Lawrence. You are on fire, by the way. I am watching the number of projects that you're blitzing through in the community, and it is incredibly impressive. So a shout out to Lawrence that's in the chat right now. So instead of a single repository, there are actually 3 connected repositories that Maven uses to fetch these packages, fetch these dependencies. The first is my local repository, which explain when Maven uses the local repository. We know that which Maven checks first. We know that this is the repository that Maven will check first. Which Maven checks first for the packages, dependencies of my web app. The second is my public upstream repository, which Maven will check next. If a package is not in my local repository. The third is the Maven Central repository. So let's talk about that. The third is the Maven Central repository, which is a public repository with the greatest collection of packages for Java applications. However, Maven will only visit this repository if the first 2 do not have the packages or dependencies it is looking for due to high traffic going into the Maven Central repository. So these are my quick, I guess, almost like relaxed explanations, and it's how I personally understand these concepts. Always don't give yourself that pressure to be like, I have to write the perfect definition from the get-go, because I feel like learning is all about just being able to reflect on where you are at the present. And sometimes even if you don't have that perfect explanation yet, write down how you understand it in the meantime, because in the future, maybe you can reflect back on these learnings and be like, wow, I'd actually define it a little bit differently now. And just like that, you can see how you grow, in your understanding of all of these concepts. Okay, cool. So we have explained, we've pasted our screenshot, and we've explained what we've done so far. And we can actually move on to the next step now. Vosco Vem in the chat says, hi, Nat. Hello. Welcome to this live demo of our project, and I hope you enjoy. Have you started the DevOps project series already, or are you starting fresh? I'm very curious. Okay, cool. Step number 3, let's connect the CodeArtifact repository. So on the next page, we're going to click on something that says, oops, I'm using the wrong tab. Let me just flick back here. So on the next page, let's click on View Connection Instructions, okay? And in the dialog, we're going to select Mac and Linux, because we're going to select Mac and Linux because the EC2 instance that's hosting our Cloud9 environment is a Linux computer. And then for the package manager client, do you recall who is our package manager? The answer is Maven. Cool. Why are we viewing connection instructions? What's going on? What does it mean by connect to repository? Right now, we've created a CodeArtifact repository that's in the cloud that is going to be hosting and storing all of the dependencies for our project. But at the moment, CodeArtifact isn't connected to our project yet. It is just in the cloud saying, okay, I'm ready to start storing dependencies. I'm ready to start storing packages. But which project am I going to be storing these packages and dependencies for? I don't really know yet. So to make sure that it is, this connection exists, we're going to be going through the connection instructions, which is what we're doing right now. So yeah, we're going to select our operating system. It is Mac and Linux. We're choosing MVN as our package manager. And now we're going to copy the code that's in step 3. Okay, going to select copy. Oh, it's Eric. Vosco Vem is Eric. Wow, welcome to this live demo. It's so cool to have you here. Thanks so much for being here. Okay, we're going to copy the commands that are in step 3, and we're going to run that straight away in Cloud9. So let me just paste that in the terminal, run that, and that was really fast. It's already run. So that was very successful. Okay, I'm going to minimize this so you can see more as well. Okay, just like that. And what's next? What's next is, we've already run these commands, so we're going to skip through that in the step-by-step guide. What's next is, you might notice we still have a few steps left in the connection settings panel. Let me flick back here, and it's right. Do you notice that we actually have a step 4, we have a step 5, we have a step 6? Wow, there's actually more that we need to do to connect our CodeArtifact repository with our project. But to do these, do you see how it says add your server to the list of servers to your settings.xml? What is settings.xml? Have we seen that yet? No, we haven't actually. Look at your Cloud9 environment and look at the files that are inside here. Do you see a settings.xml? No, it doesn't actually exist yet. So let's create that file, actually, because it's telling us that we need to add this code to the file. So let's create the file that it's going to go into. Cool. what is settings.xml? How is it different from pom.xml that's over here? You might recall that pom.xml was a file that we kind of touched on in our last project. And pom.xml creates the web app. The pom.xml file gives Maven the instructions on how to build your web app. So think of it as a recipe that tells Maven the ingredients, i.e. the dependencies, the packages, and how to put them together to build the web app. But settings.xml is slightly different. They're almost like twins, or they're like sisters. They work very closely together, I feel. Now that Maven knows what dependencies it needs, it has the recipe book. Settings.xml, which is the file we're about to create, that's going to tell Maven, where do you find these ingredients? Okay. Let's say like there's a certain recipe that says you need 6 eggs and you need 3 tomatoes. So if you're just looking at this recipe, you're like, okay, 6 eggs, 3 tomatoes, but you don't have any of these ingredients. So where do you find them? Settings.xml will tell you how. And specifically in this scenario, it's going to tell Maven where to find the dependencies and how to connect to the right repositories, like our CodeArtifact repository, to get access. Because again, CodeArtifact is going to be storing a copy of all of the dependencies that our project is going to need. So it's going to, settings.xml is going to say like, you're going to visit the CodeArtifact by doing this. This is where you're going to find CodeArtifact, and this is how you're going to get access to the dependencies that are inside. And that's why it's so important to create this file. Imagine if those instructions don't exist. Maven's going to be like, well, I know I need these dependencies, but I don't actually know where to find it. So let's create that settings.xml file by first running this first command. Okay, we're going to run that first command. And then there's a second command here as well that we're going to run. So let's run that through as well. So we're just going to paste that into our terminal. Click enter. And do you see that? Bam! Just like that, the settings.xml file is already created. It's already in our left-hand navigation panel, ready for us to click on. So I'm going to click on that. And here it is, ready for us to use. How easy was that? That was very, very fast. If you'd like a bit of a, hey, slow down, we just pasted a few commands in the terminal. What were they talking about? Let's go through it. So the first line that we pasted, this thing, is telling your computer, hey, can we go to the folder where the project files are stored? Again, remember, your terminal unfortunately doesn't have hands, or it doesn't really have the ability to click and drag things. We have the ability to do this because we have a very nice and visual interface on our computers, but terminals don't really have that interface. So you actually need to give them specific commands to be like, oh, can you click into this folder? And now cd, which stands for change directory, is the command that you tell your terminal to be like, okay, now double click. Let's click into this. So we've clicked into our web app projects folder. Okay, and now the second command says echo settings, these settings tags, and a settings.xml. So what is it saying? The echo command just tells your terminal to output this line. So it outputs the lines, this tag called settings, and there's like a /n, and then there's like another tag that says settings. So what this means is the /n is a new line. Do you see how in this file they aren't on the same line? They don't look like this, do they? The moment it was created, it looked like this. Oh, it looked like this. And that was because that /n was a new line character that enabled these two to be on separate lines. And echo is basically means output. So the first part says output these two tags, settings, with the new line character in between. And then there's this little arrow that says settings.xml. So what that last part of the command was saying was, okay, so you need to output this this text, output it into a new file called settings.xml. So it's basically saying like push that output that you're about to create into a new file called settings.xml. And that is why that new file got created. Very, very cool. So we've created our settings.xml file now. We're now ready to take on all of those connection settings that were still left in our CodeArtifact page. So let's switch back to that CodeArtifact tab, and we can see that we have all of the code that we need to paste into our settings.xml file. first things first, it's our servers. So let's copy that code and let's put that here, okay? And on your keyboard, press enter, enter. Okay, so now we have new lines in our file, and this is just going to help to make things look very, very neat. It's not absolutely required, but it just helps with making your code look really, really neat. And then next is step 5. Step 5 also has this bunch of code, so let's copy all of that and let's put that through as well. Paste that into your settings.xml file. Enter, enter. Flashy. That was very nice. And same thing with step 6. So copied it and then paste it. Done. You don't need to go enter for the last one since it's the last one, but you can if you want. It's up to you. It's up to you. Okay, so what was the code in steps 4, 5, and 6 saying? I was copying a lot of code here. I was just copying and pasting it, copying and pasting it, copying and pasting it. But what did they actually mean? So these code snippets are basically additional settings that Maven's going to work with in order to get access to all of the repositories and all of the dependencies that are stored inside CodeArtifact. Okay, so when we copy the code in step 4, that section was called servers, right? Do you see the tags that says servers? It starts with the servers thing and it ends with this little servers bracket. So this is called the servers section. And this section is where you store your access details to the repositories. In this example, you've added your authentication token. Do you see how it says auth token here? So you've added an authentication token, which is kind of like an access pass. It's kind of like I have access to code artifact kind of pass or wristband that will help Maven with getting access to the repository that's storing all of the packages in CodeArtifact. That's the Nixwork packages repository we set up in the previous step. Next one is profiles. Now, this section is where you write this little rule book in Maven on when Maven should use which repository. We only have one repository, okay? We only have one package repository in this project, so it's less visible, the impact of this section. But please know that this profile section is so, so, so important when it gets to more complex projects. It's going to be pulling from multiple repositories. If it's going to be pulling from multiple repositories, how is Maven going to know, oh, in this scenario, I'm going to pull from this repository. Okay, and then in this scenario, I'm going to pull from that repository. How it's going to figure that out is from the profile section. So that's what this entire section was all about. Ours is very, very straightforward because we only have one repository to pull from. But you're going to see this section become a bit more stacked if you ever see scenarios with like multiple repositories in the project, relevant to the project. Okay, next is the mirror section. So this section, which is like step number 6, okay, do you see how it says optional? So the mirror section is the backup location that Maven can check if it can't find what it needs in the first local repo. Because oh, thank you so much, Ruben. Thanks, Ruben. Ruben said, super interesting. Looking forward to coming back to the project in due course. Me too. I'm very, very excited as well. Thanks so much for being here today, Ruben. The mirror section sets up these backup locations that Maven can check if it can't find what it needs in the first local repo it goes to. So I know that we've talked about this flow that goes from your local repo to the public upstream and up to Maven central repository. But what if there is actually a backup repository, a backup local one that Maven can check before it needs to go to that local hardware store? So that would be like the mirror section. So you might have noticed here, we don't really have another repository that we define here. All the time it's just Nixwork packages. And what that means is the backup location we've set is the same local repository. It's Nixwork packages again. This means that for any repository request denoted by this asterisk here in the mirror of kind of line, for any repository requests, Maven is just going to take those requests to the Nixwork packages repository and see if the required packages are in there. Okay, the reason why this is the case for our project is because our Network packages repository is the only one that we have. We're not in a situation where we have multiple local repositories right now, but you can imagine how this is a really great section to add if you're in more complex scenarios. And also, it is always a good idea to set up this backup backup repository option as soon as possible from the very, very start, so that you can catch anything just in case in the future there aren't any backup repositories set up. So now that we have all of this code, this amazing code in our settings.xml file, I think it's about time we start documenting some of these learnings. I think that was a pretty juicy 20 minutes learning about how this works. So take a screenshot snippet of your code, which is your settings.xml file. It is going to be hard to capture the entire file, by the way. I know this file is pretty hefty. So all you need to do is capture a section of it. So let's screenshot a section just like this. That looks pretty good. I'll take it. And paste that screenshot into your documentation template. Okay. And boom, put it in like this. Very nice. So what you did next was you connected your Cloud9 IDE to CodeArtifact so that... Why did you connect your IDE to CodeArtifact? It was so that CodeArtifact knows which project it is going to be storing dependencies for. And in actual fact, we didn't quite connect our IDE, I feel. I feel like what we did was we connected our... I connected my web app project via my Cloud9 IDE. Cloud9 IDE was kind of like the channel through which I connected my web app project to CodeArtifact. It's not exactly like we're setting up a connection between CodeArtifact and Cloud9 directly. We're trying to connect our CodeArtifact repository with our web app project, and how we do that, the platform for doing that, was the Cloud9 IDE. And I created a new file called settings.xml in my web app. Settings.xml is... What is this file? What does it do? What a good prompt. I feel like I really needed to recap what this does. So settings.xml is the file that will give Maven instructions on where to find the dependencies Maven will need to fetch. And something else. Can you recall what else it does? And how Maven will get access to these repositories. That are storing these dependencies. So the code I pasted into settings.xml were provided by CodeArtifact. I did not have to write from scratch. The snippets of code explain the code you've put into settings.xml. What do they do? Ooh, this is a good prompt. What do they do? Let me think. Explain the code. What does this code in settings.xml do? I'm gonna say these snippets of code stores authentication tokens. Authentication tokens to CodeArtifact, and sets up and defines when Maven will visit which repository. Plus, it also sets up something else. What else does it set up? It sets up the mirrors. It sets up plus where Maven should visit to find backup local repositories. which is optional. I'm going to make that very clear to myself. Okay, alrighty. Let's move our screenshots down to make space. Gosh, I must be very talkative today. I am maxing out the space on my documentation template so quickly, but that's okay. All right. Don't forget to save your settings.xml. Okay, save that. Bam, it is finally saved. And next we're going to compile our application using this following command. So let's compile it right away. And what does compiling mean? Compiling is like translating your project code into a language that your computers can understand. I think it's very important to realize that even if programming language looks very, very technical, we're not actually speaking computer language straight away. This programming language, or like what we're defining in these files in our code, still needs to be translated into machine code that the machines can actually understand and run. So that process of translating it into machine code is called compiling. And when you compile your project, you're also making sure everything is correctly set up and ready to turn into a working app. So compiling is a great way just to make sure that you've actually set up your web app correctly. There isn't anything you've forgotten. There isn't anything you still need to install. And look at that, it is just compiling straight away fast. The first time you compile your project, this is going to be running for a little bit of time because it is the first time that Maven is going to be fetching all of these project packages and dependencies and eventually storing that in your local repository. Do you remember that flow diagram that kind of goes from Maven Central Store, arrow down? There was that actually, I just realized I have a copy of that. And it was like arrow down the upstream repository and an arrow down repository. So what's happening right now is Maven is checking this and it's going, okay, you have none of the repositories, none of the packages and dependencies I need. So I'm going to have to go here to look for all of the packages and dependencies I need to run my web app. And once it has that, it can also store a copy of that in the repository here as well. So that is why there's always like this downstream flow, because once it has a copy of that, it can just store, once it fetches it for the first time, often Maven can just store a copy of that in the next repository down the list, so that the next time Maven needs it, it's a lot faster to find it. Okay, cool beans. So we have compiled the code, and now let's head back to our CodeArtifact console. Ooh, interesting. What's going to happen now? So all you have to do is exit out of that connection instruction stuff and click on the refresh button. What's going to be here? What's going to be here? Wow, do you see that? This was not here just a second ago, was it? But look at that. These are all the packages just for that simple web app we've created. Isn't that immense? It's just amazing, isn't it? The amount of like hidden tools and resources that are all working together in the background just so that we can have a nice, awesome web app in front of us when we're using it. So much appreciation to the way things are built. It's honestly just fascinating. And I feel like it's one of those things where the deeper you dig in, the more you're like, oh, I did not know it was going to be this like immense, this big, this space. So it's like a constant state of awe, I feel, when you're learning this kind of stuff. Okay, so yeah, again, there are pages and pages of packages here. Pages and pages of packages. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, what's happening here? When your project was being built, Maven successfully fetched all of the tools and materials your web app will need. These were all downloaded from the upstream repository or that Maven Central repository, and now they're available as a copy in your local repository over here inside CodeArtifact. So cool. So let's take a screenshot of this packages panel because it is just so cool. There's so much in here. And let's put that into our documentation template, plus write a few words of explanations. Okay, cool. Let me grab my documentation template once more, and let's paste that screenshot in the next slide that's called Test the Connection. And let's paste that in here. Beautiful. Beautiful. This is a great table that's just a bit of a peek into all of the packages that are now inside my CodeArtifact repository. And yeah, let's have a look. To test the connection between Cloud9 and CodeArtifact, I compiled my web app. Compiling means, oof, hefty question. Translating my web application's code into machine code that servers can actually understand and run. Wow, thank you so much, Eric. Eric says, this is interesting and your explanations are smooth. Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel like it is a constant want to explain things even better, even smoother. Yeah, I feel like hopefully by the time we get to project 6 of the series, the explanations will become even more smooth in terms of how all of these services are related to each other and how people can really get that grasp of going from like, okay, I have zero experience to, oh, I have a pretty good understanding to the way web apps are created and how like the CI/CD pipeline can really support that creation and that development process and that deployment process as well. All right, back into the documentation. So after compiling, I checked, which repository did you check after compiling your web app? What did you see? I checked my local repository and saw that my local repository now has pages and pages of packages inside. Exclamation. This means Maven has now grabbed packages from the upstream repository or Maven Central repository in Maven Central repository and installed, kept a copy locally. And now we are seeing the entire CodeArtifact, like the reason why CodeArtifact exists, kind of in action. Now we have a copy locally in our local repository. So now imagine in the future, so a package called Plexus Class Worlds suddenly goes down in the public repository. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, this package is no longer available right now. But you're like, well, actually it's okay because I have a copy in my local repository. I can just use that copy instead of like freaking out because imagine if you don't have a copy and you're like, oh, okay, I can't actually build my web app anymore because one of the packages that it needs is not available. That it is like these kinds of scenarios we're absolutely avoiding with the power of CodeArtifact and having these kinds of tools with us. Okay, last step for today's project, well, in terms of like the technical part of this project, is to set up an IAM policy for using CodeArtifact. Why are we setting up an IAM policy, you might wonder? I'm going to answer that with a question. What services do you think have access to the backups you've stored in CodeArtifact right now? What services actually have access to the local repository you've set up? Do you think your local repository is now available to the entire world? Like anyone can see a local repository? Do you think all AWS services now has access to your local repository's dependencies? Well, here's the answer. Eventually, other DevOps services like AWS Code Build, AWS Code Pipeline, and your development environments like Cloud9, they're going to need access to the packages that you store in CodeArtifact, but they don't have access by default. So they're going to need all of the dependencies you've stored a copy of, but they don't have access by default. They can't get through the door. So we need to define an IAM policy so that later on, all of these services can use the resources that we've just installed into our CodeArtifact repository. So how are we going to do that? We're going to go into IAM. Let's visit IAM in our management console. Whoopsie daisies. Let's visit IAM. Okay, very nice. Open that in a new tab. Okay, cool. And here, we're going to click on Policies in the left-hand navigation panel. And we're going to click on Create Policy. So now we're going to create a policy. And as a reminder, IAM policies are kind of like rule books. It's kind of like saying, you get access to this, you get access to this, you get access to this. And like each policy it kind of breaks down is almost like a little pass or a little book of like things that you can or cannot have access to now. Let's see this in action. So switch to the JSON tab when you get to the create policy page and copy this policy code that's provided to you. Okay, we're going to copy this code and we're going to paste that straight into the code editor panel. Heads up, if you're not feeling too comfortable with like how fast we're going through it with creating an IAM policy, please know that a very, very in-depth explanation and a slower version of this is available in our Security with AWS IAM exercise. The live demo for that is also in our YouTube channel. Okay, so I just pasted that into my policy editor panel. Okay, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to unpack the spicy policy with you. That's what I'm going to do next. Yeah, I was always planning on doing that. Let's unpack the spicy policy. This policy that we've just pasted into here, we've just learned that we've just talked about how policies are rule books. We kind of just pasted a little sheet of rules in here right now, but this sheet isn't exactly quite readable. You might be looking at this and being like, none of this really makes sense to me. So let's break it down together. Now, at the very, very top was the line that says, oh, dearie me. Let me make sure you can actually see this. Okay, there you go. At the very top here, it was version 2012-10-17. This is basically the version number for the JSON language we're using to define this policy. It is not the rulebook itself. It is almost like saying, oh, by the way, this policy is written in this version of JSON. So not too relevant. We're going to skip straight into our second line. All those lines that fall under this statement bracket, which is everything else, by the way, is basically the juicy part of our JSON policy that's defining those rules. So do you see how in this square brackets, we have more brackets? Okay, we have this bracket here, and we have this bracket here. Do you see? Like one bracket here and a second bracket here. So each bracket is one statement. So this is one statement defining a rule that I'm going to make, and then this is another statement defining another rule I'm about to make. Okay, the first rule starts with the effect is allow. So that's basically saying whatever action I'm about to say, you're allowed to do it. Okay, the reverse of this is deny. So which means that if I ever write a statement that says effect deny, it means whatever action I'm about to mention, you're not allowed to do it. But okay, in this case, we're allowing it. We're allowing it. It's chill. And the action that we're allowing is these. Okay, we're basically saying whoever gets granted this policy that I'm writing, they're allowed to do this. They're allowed to go into CodeArtifact and get an authorization token, which we've talked about is kind of like that access pass or that wristband to give you access. They're also allowed to get the repository endpoint, which means that anyone that gets this policy is now allowed to find the exact URL of a CodeArtifact repository. They're also allowed to read from a repository, which means anything that now gets this policy is now allowed to read or download the packages that's inside CodeArtifact. So again, there's a resource that says star, and star is a very, very good way to just say all. So in this context, it means the permissions we've just defined, they apply to all the resources. In this case, all the CodeArtifact repositories. It's not just one or two CodeArtifact repositories you're now allowed to, get authorization tokens for or get repository endpoints for. It is all the repositories in CodeArtifact that you now have access to do these three things to. Okay, so that was very, very handy. Thank you so much for giving me that access pass. The next statement is something that's a bit less relevant, so we're just going to go through this one a bit quicker. But this second statement is basically saying anyone that gets this policy also gets temporary security credentials to interact with CodeArtifact. And this is basically something that any AWS service is going to need in order to request that authorization token in the first place. You know how here we're like, you're allowed to get an authorization token, but to even get an authorization token, you need to be allowed to do that in the first place. You know what I mean? You're like, you need to have access to be able to ask. And in this case, we're basically saying, okay, you now have the permission to ask. If you don't give this, if you don't include this statement, literally anyone that gets this policy will be it's going to be a bit redundant because they're not even given the permission to ask for an authorization token. You need to give this, you need to add the statement so that they're even like allowed to ask for that authorization token. I hope that was clear. And all we're going to do now is we're going to take a screenshot of this. Oh, and add this to our documentation template. So let's chuck this over now to our documentation template. And let's put that in here. You know what? That is perfect. The way it just snapped straight into my frame, I'm very happy with this. And let's just fill in the prompts right away. Prompt 1 says, I also created an IAM policy because, do you still remember why we created this policy? Because other services in my CI/CD pipeline, e.g. code build, code pipeline, will be needing access to the dependencies, to the packages, dependencies stored in CodeArtifact. Okay. I can be even clearer and say, by default, these services do not have access. So they need to be granted access through an IAM policy. Nice. I'm quite happy with that. Okay, next up, I defined my IAM policy using JSON. Correct, we use JSON code to define our policy. This policy will enable the policy holder. What is it going to enable? It's going to enable the policy holder to, first things first, get authorization tokens. Tripty says, I'm watching while at work, so I'll definitely have to revisit this later. Thank you so much for being here, Tripty. I really, really appreciate it. And we got your back, of course. Come back whenever. And I can't wait to see you try this project later on. Thank you so much. This policy will enable the policy holder to get authorization tokens, i.e. access to, access to CodeArtifact. And also the ability to fetch the packages stored in CodeArtifact's repositories. So perfect. That is I'm quite happy with these explanations of what we've just done with the IAM policy. So we're going to finish this off by naming our policy. So once we've already defined what it does, we actually haven't given it a name yet. So let's give it a name. Oh, I can exit out of my full screen mode like this. So let's give it a name by clicking next here and pasting the policy name here. And then for the description, we're going to add it right here as well in the description box. Very nice. And like that, let's click create policy. Oh, it says it failed to create because it already exists, which is my bad. I've created this policy when I was testing this project. So let's just add a -1 for my scenario where this policy already exists. Oopsies. And and it's all created now, so that's perfect. So nice work. We have a working repository that can be used by other services now. Because of this IAM policy, other services that are granted this policy can now fetch dependencies from your CodeArtifact repository. So you will see this in action in the next project, which is going to be released very, very soon. It should be released tomorrow, and you're going to be able to see that policy in action as well. So I can't wait for you to see that. In the meantime, we've actually just finished the steps required for this project today. So that was super fun. All you have to do next is first wrap up your documentation. You're going to see that there's actually a few very, very interesting slides that you can fill up to share and summarize your learnings. I can't wait to see what everyone does with this slide, because it is the first time we're really using some sort of architecture diagram looking thing to add to your documentation template. So let us know how you find it. Don't forget to fill in the prompts. And also, another thing you can do is just make sure that you are filling in your profile photo and your full name, etc., into the documentation template. So in here, you can always just upload a photo straight into Canva, so straight into this web app that's hosting your documentation template right now, and you can just always upload a photo straight in here. So I have a photo handy, so I'm going to use this photo, and then I can drag it in here. It already has my face snapped in right away, and you can even double click on this and drag this up. So you can be like, I want more of my face to fill up that circle. Okay, let's just say I'm that kind of person. And then just like that, done. Boom. Doesn't that look pretty neat? My GitHub handle is Natasha Ong is Coding. So I'm going to use that. And my title page is all done. I feel like this looks really neat. I'm very impressed with this. But you can even use this little hack to replicate this content across the other pages of your documentation template. So for example, I just copy this. I can even press group to group it into one big thing. Okay, I can press copy here, and then I can just press paste here. Oops, I clicked on the wrong icon. Click paste here. Oh, okay, I see. I copied the wrong thing. But click here, press copy, click on the next slide, press paste. Okay, you have this now, and you can almost overlay it on top of the second page's equivalent. Okay, it's kind of like this, and then you can size it down so that the circles are about the right size. Okay, do you see me kind of slowly putting it all together? Okay, do you see how my circle is not completely overlaid on top of the default circle? Once that's done, you can use this to say layer it send backwards, or you can layer it send to back. Okay, so now it's behind the default ones, and I'm going to delete the default ones. Bam, it's just mine now. And just like that, I have completely replaced the other one without needing to drag in a new photo, type in my name again, type in my GitHub repository again. That was really easy. And you can now just copy this one, copy it now, and in the next page, delete this straight away, and then paste in what you've copied. Bam, just like that, it's replicated. Okay, so replicating this is super easy. It shouldn't take longer than 3 minutes all up. And if you ever get stuck, ask a question in the community. I'm here to help you as well. We all are here to support each other in this journey, so please don't hesitate to ask a question. I really truly think, and the entire team really truly thinks, that this is something that really helps to lift the entire community up. Cool. Next thing, share your work. So now that you have an amazing documentation template that's all about your learnings from this project, you can click share, and then you can click on a button, a download button that can download your documentation as a PDF. So that is a super, super handy little tool, because downloading as a PDF is a great way for you to share it on LinkedIn. We've implemented something new over the last week. Something new we've done is we've created a link that you can click on right away to open a pre-filled LinkedIn post ready for you to use. So I've just clicked on that link here, and boom, do you see how this post has just been pre-filled on LinkedIn? That's wild. All you need to do next is make sure that this network tag is an actual network tag, make sure you're actually clicking here so that it turns into this like bolded black thing. And that will make sure that we actually get notified that you've posted about this your documentation, and we can come and support. And the next thing you do after this is you click on the plus button that says more, and then you click on the add a document, click on choose file, and then you can boom straight away pick the PDF document you've downloaded from Canva. So I know I haven't downloaded my my documentation yet, but maybe we can just like use someone else's documentation as a placeholder. Shout out to Mujtaba, who's written a very, very great documentation on his Amazon Lex project. Let's say I wrote this. Okay, let's say I wrote this, and let's say this is the documentation I want to add. Paste that into your document title. Just have any title here. Click done, and boom, that was so quick. You already have a LinkedIn post ready for you to just click send or click post. So yeah, that is how you could share it on LinkedIn in just less than 5 minutes as well. And once that's all done, make sure you delete your resources. We've come to the finish line now. Do you remember what I said at the very start? Delete those resources, okay? You don't need to delete the IAM user or the IAM policy you've created. Things in IAM are free to stay in your account. You won't get charged for keeping them. But in your Cloud9 console, please delete the environment you've set up. In your EC2 console, delete the EC2 instance, and let's just do that right away now. So I'm going to my Cloud9 console. Oh, you don't see it here. So let's go search for Cloud9. Oh, thank you, Eric. Eric in the chat says, I like the link idea. Very, very fast. I'm very glad. Eric also says, sometimes when I download it, it comes in a zip folder. Any reason why? Great question. So the reason for that would be because you downloaded it as a JPG, maybe, or a PNG, which means you downloaded them as images. You want to switch that to downloading it as a as a PDF. So I think I should be able to give you an example of this. Let me just quickly just give anyone in the team access to this. I'm going to try to demonstrate that to you right away. Sorry, just give me a second to switch gears so you can see. Okay, so let's say this is... okay, apologies, guys. I have just used the wrong settings, which is my bad. Let's say this is you, and you want to download your documentation template after you're all done. You would just click share here, okay? And do you see how there's a download option? Okay, oh, there's a download button. So click on download, and instead of PNG, which is suggested, switch that away to PDF standard, okay? And download it. And now it is an actual PDF document. Because if you use that, no thanks. If you use the default option, which I know just now was PNG, like the suggested option, it's going to download as a zip folder because it's going to be downloaded as a collection of photos instead of one document. So let me just show you the comparison now. So I'm going to open my downloads folder to show you. All right, do you see how I have a zip folder and I have a PDF? So this PDF is what I created when I selected the PDF option. Okay, it's everything I wrote as a PDF. And then when I stayed on the suggested one, when I stayed on the suggested option, this one, when I stayed on the PNG option, it became a zip folder with all of the documentation pages as individual photos. We don't really need that. We just need it to be one single document. So make sure to change it to PDF. All right, okay, we're gonna make sure we actually delete our Cloud9 console. So let's click into Cloud9 and let's delete the environment. So I'm gonna click on delete, type delete in here. And next, there's also a step that says in your EC2 console, delete the EC2 instance that your Nextdoor IDS has created to run the environment. I know we didn't in this project literally manually create an EC2 instance, but sometimes resources gets created as a byproduct of other things we create. In this scenario, an EC2 instance has been created as a byproduct of wanting to run our Cloud9 IDE. So let's make sure we delete that too. So let's visit EC2. Let's take a trip to the EC2 console. And let's make sure that under instances, these two are both now deleted. So let's go to instance state and click on terminate instance. And click on that terminate button. And just like that, our EC2 instances will be going to sleep. So it's going to be done. All done. In our CodeCommit console, my goodness, we do have a few consoles to visit today, don't we? So in our CodeCommit console, let's delete the Git repository that's hosting all of our project apps code. So let's click on the Git repository I created. Let's not create a new one. My bad. Let's click on the one I've created and go delete repository. Type delete in the field to make sure it's deleted. Okay, and in my CodeArtifact console, phew, almost at the finish line, everyone. Let's delete the repositories. So we're going to delete the repository that's holding all of those dependencies for our project. So first, we're just going to delete the local one. Oh, I swear there's something about orange buttons that I just get drawn to when really I should be clicking the delete button. All right, so type delete in the field to confirm your deletion. And same thing with Maven Central Store, which is your public upstream repository. We don't need that anymore either. We don't need our local hardware store anymore. We've said goodbye to building tonight. And I think that's it. That's a wrap. That was part 3 of this DevOps and AWS series done. Congratulations. Next up, we need to gather all of the necessary pieces to build our Java web application resource, which is called a WAR file, which is where the app really comes together and becomes this one bundled file that a server can use to host. Again, if that sounded a little bit technical, we're going to go through that bit by bit in the next project. But yeah, this next project is where the next service in the CI/CD pipeline called code build comes into play. In the meantime, today you've learned how to set up a CodeArtifact domain and repository. That was our local repository. We set up the upstream repository. We got to meet the Maven Central repository. We connected Cloud9, our Cloud9 IDE, or we connected our Java web app to CodeArtifact through Cloud9. So that was awesome. We also compiled our project with CodeArtifact, which means we compiled it, which means we translated the programming language or the code that we've used to write up our project app into machine code. And we've also implemented that IAM policy. Again, cool thing, all of these things that we've learned, we've documented. We have a copy of all of these learnings in our own back pocket as well. So that's awesome. So good on you for getting to the finish line to another project with me today. Thank you so much for being here. And a special shout out to everyone that's in the Nextdoor community that's also engaging in the chat. What a great pleasure it is to be doing these projects with you. Shout out to Ruben. Thank you, Rio. Thank you, Abbas. Thank you, Uduak. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Eric. I can't wait to see you in the next one. Oh, Gabrielle, thank you so much. Gabrielle says, you are amazing, Nat. Sending that positive energy right back to you. I can't wait to see you in the next project. Let's catch up in the community in the meantime. Okay, take care. Stay well. And I hope you have a great weekend. All right. Bye, everyone. See ya. Thank you so much for being here.